Over the next couple days, you're going to be looking at some Renaissance art. So today I want to go through what was going on with Renaissance art, with some of the characteristics, and then analyze a couple pieces just so you have an example for when you do your assignment for those of you who are not going to be able to join us on the tour. Okay? So one of the things that you'll start noticing in Renaissance art is people trying to display the same scene. So they're doing the same thing. So in this case, two different artists, both trying to depict the sacrifice of Isaac, which is a story, a religious story that's told in many different faiths. In this case, we're referring to the Roman Catholic Church, their interpretation of this story. So you'll see that a bunch during this time period, where an artist, one person will create a painting or an image of the David or Jesus in some way, and then somebody else will do the same scene in their own medium. Okay, so that's something you'll notice as well. Another thing you'll notice is that compared to the Middle Ages on the right-hand side, that art during this time period is going to have some depth to it. You can see on the right-hand side, it's very much two-dimensional. It's very much connected to a church. Now, there are some things that are religious on the left-hand side, but you can see how it's becoming 3D. It's more realistic. The humans even look more realistic on the left-hand side. I know you don't have a great detail on this, but you can tell there's a lot more realism in the left-hand side. So that's a good transition for us to talk about some of the characteristics of this art. So number one, looking at human beings. So what are humans capable of? What have humans done? So that's very much that humanism that we've talked about before. The second one is painting or sculpting humans as they actually look. So their natural form. That's why the David is so impressive. The way that he is sculpted out of that piece of rock is so natural, and he actually looks like a human being, a big human being, but a human being nonetheless, compared to what was going on in the Middle Ages. You're also going to see some depth to these paintings. I already mentioned that. You'll see a bunch of geometric shapes as well. There's some symmetry in some of the art as well, so you can see how both sides are like mirrored in some way, and how there's a vanishing line, some depth to the images. So you'll see that. You'll get perspectives added into this, so you might have a visual of a scene, and then there might be a mirror, so you'll get to see the back side of people in a painting, which is something you don't think about, that in a lot of art you only see one side of things, but you might actually see two different sides in these paintings. There's also going to be some non-religious themes. Remember that at the end of the Middle Ages, the church was kind of losing their prestige, and so you won't just get images that focus on religious things like in the Middle Ages. You'll get other scenes of people in their natural daily lives as well. Now, people themselves will become owners of art. They will buy art and sponsor art for their own homes. So you will see that as well when you look up some of these artists, or who was paying for the art. That'll become more apparent. In some cases, they're wealthy merchants who are trying to show off that they have a bunch of money. In other cases, it's religious people who are trying to, again, show off that they have a bunch of money, but also trying to praise God. Number 6, you'll see some new architecture and sculptures. So you'll see domes, a lot more domes. So trying to go back, again, revisiting the ideas from Rome and Greece. You'll see some more columns as well. And then number 7, artists will become popular. You've heard of many of these artists from this time period. If I say Da Vinci or Michelangelo or Donatello, all these different artists, you've probably heard of them, and you probably haven't heard of anybody from the Middle Ages. And there's a reason behind that. Artists become popular. They start signing their actual work. So you know who created that or whose shop that came out of. And that goes back to number one, the rebirth of humanism. People are showing off that they are becoming Renaissance people, that maybe not specifically Renaissance, but they're showing off that they have achieved something, that they have an expertise in something. So that's something you will do in this society. So a lot of the art and all the things in society is about control. You'll see that in the art, you'll see that in cartography, you'll see that in music, you'll see that in finance. So a lot of the things that you see is about control during this Renaissance time period. I've already mentioned this, but you're going to get a bunch of different people paying for this art. There's two main groups. Number one, the elite, the nobles, the merchants who have this money are not going to be spending money on things like from the Middle Ages, where it was like protection and war and things like that. You're going to get some who are going to spend money on the arts. Okay, so they will be patrons of the art. They'll pay for people to create art. And then the other big one we'll talk about in a little bit. They'll also pay for people to commission specific things. You won't get a chance to do whatever you want as an artist. People will ask you to do something, and then they will expect you to complete that piece of art that they asked for. So as a result, you got to be well trained as an artist, and so there's going to be certain techniques that you're going to want to go to academies for to learn those things. There are female artists. There's just not as many of them, and they're usually only going to be the wealthy daughters. Because they're worried in some cases about women painting nudes or getting into difficult situations with architecture. So it's odd, I know, for modern day, but it made sense for back then in context. So again, I'm not trying to justify that, but that was the reality of the society back then. Again, society had shifted, so you will have people creating art like anything else. So you're going to be mass producing in some cases some of this art. This image gives you an idea of some of the geometric shapes. You can see columns in here, you see arches. You do see some religious images as well. There's some depth to this. There's some shadow and light play in this as well. All of those things are part of Renaissance art. The other big group that's paying for this art is the church. And they are spending tons of money during this time period on art and extravagant statues and pieces. And this actually kind of leaks into the next age that we're going to talk about after spring break, which is the Reformation. Some people are questioning, like, should the church be spending all this money on art when there's people starving to death, there's poor out there? Do we really need to be creating these fancy pieces of art? So that's what Savonarola would probably say to this. And same thing with Erasmus. He would also look at this and say, you don't have to patronize these arts. The church doesn't have to do this. Wealthy people shouldn't have to do this to save themselves. So they're going to begin to question these things. And in some cases, they'll begin to try to destroy these images and sculptures. Art, when it comes to like Da Vinci and others, will eventually cause a problem because they're trying to study humanity, and some of the things that they're finding out about humanity may not may not sit well with the Catholic Church, and so that's going to be another thing that gets questioned in the Reformation, the next time period that we're going to talk about. Here's a great image of what we were talking about during the Renaissance. Again, you can see some people in their everyday lives. You can see some depth to this. You can see how the lines on the floor kind of pinch in as they go backwards to give you that sense of depth to this image. Lots of color, different colors. You see some of the arches and some of the columns in the background, a big dome as well. So that's another example of the Renaissance art. And then look at all the different professions that you have in this image. Okay, so this is a pretty good example of what Renaissance art would look like. So remember, if you didn't join us on the tour today, at this point, you're going to have to go to that assignment and have some fun with it. Find a cool piece of art that really speaks to you, that you enjoy. There's tons out there. I gave you a list of some of the big ones, so check those out, and then do a screencast. How do you see, or maybe not see, some of those 7 things in your piece of art and from that artist themselves? You might have to do a little bit of research to figure that out, but enjoy it, and then tell me, is this really a good representation of Renaissance art based on those 7 characteristics? Did they actually hit all of those things or some of the big ones? Go ahead and submit that. It might end up being a big file, so if it becomes too big of a file, you might have to share it with me as a link to my email address. And I included my email address in the update. All right, I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and Friday for some of you who are working on this assignment, and then a wonderful spring break.